Hi, this is Lisa Norton from Material Girlfriends. Today we're going to work on Spring Month 2 Tulip Garden blocks out of the Trip Around the Sun block of the month pattern. So this one is a fun block. It really is just a joy to make. You're going to make one block that is of the dark purple and the spring green. You're going to make two blocks of the medium purple with the autumn green, and then two more blocks with the medium coral and the summer green. But since the instructions first start with the dark purple and the spring green, that's where we're going to start. So I'm going to set these other colors aside. So the instructions first have you start making your parallel flying geese. Now we've already made a couple of the parallel flying geese when we were making the winter block 2, and so to save time I'm not going to repeat myself, but just refer to that video if you haven't made your parallel flying geese yet. But the difference between this flying geese and the ones in the winter block is that you're going to have your parallel geese going two different directions, where in the winter month 2 block your parallel geese were all going the same direction. So when you're sewing your parallel flying geese, just be sure that you refer to the diagram and you take care to know where you're sewing your squares onto your rectangle. And you're going to end up with 2 leaf units. Our next piece that we're going to sew is the bottom portion of the leaf. Now, when you put this one together, you're going to go, wait a minute, they don't line up. You're going to be using the 1 3/4 and 3.5 inch rectangles, and you're going to position a 2-inch square on it. And of course, that's going to be hanging off there a little bit, but it works, I promise you. So first draw your line on the wrong side of your green fabric, if you can tell which is the wrong side. I love Marcus Batiks. They make such nice quality fabrics. Next, you're going to be positioning that square onto that rectangle. So you're going to want to pay attention to your diagrams again in the pattern, because you're going to have one sewn on going one direction. So I have my line drawn. I'm going to be sewing it going this direction, and my other piece is a mirror image. It's sewn the other way. When you sew, you're going to sew from the flat side to the corner, and just don't even worry that it goes off the smaller rectangle. You're just not going to pay attention. Laura, can you throw me a pin? Here's a pin. Ouch. Okay, she really didn't throw it, but so just stick a little pin in it so it stays where it's supposed to, and we're going to go ahead and sew that piece. And I'm sewing off that rectangle on the bottom, but I'm still going to my corner. So now I have my 2 pieces. But we have that little piece hanging off. No worries, you're just going to trim that flat. So after you press it, you're going to press the seam down, trim 1/4 inch away from the sewn line. Press it nice and flat, and then you're just going to snip off that little bit. I'll let you do that one. Now our next step that we're going to do is we're going to be sewing it to the stem. So you're going to have your stem fabric, and you're going to first sew the one leaf, or base of the leaf, I guess, to that stem. So when we sew, I always ask people, what's the point? Now our point along this diagonal is on this side, but the seam that we're going to sew, it's down here. So the alignment, I always tell folks, align where your point is, and if it's slightly long or short at the other end, it's not going to matter as much. So that's the side I'm going to align. And I'll just sew this up. That looks good. So now I'm going to sew my other portion to it so that it's mirrored. So I position it. My point is down at this end, so that's the end I want to start on. So I perfectly align that and then start sewing. It's easier to sew if the needle stays threaded, which was the job of my leader, but for some reason it didn't want to stick. It wasn't doing its job. There we go. Well, that didn't work. What's wrong with my little machine?
You had a button.
Oh, well, let's pause this and I'll fix my machine. Okay, we're back. The machine is back to being happy and I finished sewing that seam. So, and I've got the stem unit going. So I'm going to quickly give it a quick press. Quickly. Very fast. Oops. This is what happens when you wiggle your iron. And our next step now is to sew. Do you mind trimming those for me, Lo?
You trim those off.
We're going to sew this unit onto our stem unit. Now the point is down here, so I'm going to align my point first and then give it a quick sew while the dog barks. Casey. And there we go. That turned out pretty good. Okay, we'll sew this one on too. Now the point is down here. We have a point here, a point here, a point here, a point there. So we're going to line up on our point. And sew from that point. This one needs just a little bit of easing, so hopefully it lines up. Stuck. There we go. Oh, not too bad. I like that. I bet I could press that into submission. So I've got my stem portion all done, and now I'll start on the tulip. So the tulip portion, you're going to be making half square triangles out of the 2.5 inch squares. So you're going to draw a diagonal line on the wrong side of the light gray square, and then we're just going to do a 1/4 inch seam on either side of that diagonal line. Oop, it's going squiggly. There you go. My line got a little squiggly there, but now we're going to trim it. Okay, you're going to press the seam towards the dark, and then we're going to square it to 2.5 inches if we need, or 2 inches, I'm sorry. So Laura's going to do that pressing for me real quick. Our next piece that we're going to sew is a flying geese. This time we don't have to make our flying geese a parallel, just a regular one. So your first step is to draw a diagonal line on the wrong side of your winter purple, and then you're going to sew from the flat side to the corner. You'll fold or press this wing closed before you could sew this wing on. And then your flying geese will be made. Laura, would you give this a little press for me?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to position. Okay, well, I say, well, what's the point? Well, we have 2 points this time. So since I prefer to sew from the flat side instead of into the corner, because that usually will be shoved into that little hole of darkness, I'm going to start from this end. There she goes. There we go. Now my flying geese is looking great.
I have to trim this.
So we'll trim the extra fabric off the back side. Again, I think in the instructions I tell you to trim this away first, but sometimes I just worry about my position if I got it right. So I don't normally trim mine until I'm absolutely done and I'm happy with my results. Then I'll trim it and give it a good pressing. And Laura is trimming up my half square triangles. When you square your half square triangles, you're going to want to line the diagonal line of the ruler with your half square triangle. You want to show them what we're meaning, Laura, when you trim those? So it needed just a little bit trimmed. And you see the diagonal line of this square? She lines that diagonal line with the diagonal line of the square. We'd bring it down to the 2-inch mark and then trim off any excess. Then what is important is that your tips have the seam that goes corner to corner. If your seam is slightly off, you're not going to get the results that you want. So the corner to corner seam is really important. I'm going to give this one a press. And I'm just going to trim with scissors. You can do it with a ruler and a rotary cutter if you prefer, but it should be about 1/4 of an inch away from that seam line. That looks good. So now we can put our tulip together. So I'm going to lay my tulip units the way they look in the diagram. That's not right. Now that's looking like a very pretty tulip. So our next step is to sew the square to your half square triangle. Again, you ask yourself, what's the point? You find your point that you're going to sew, and that's where you're going to start. You line up perfectly at that point, and you start your 1/4 inch seam. And I'll do the same thing to this side. What's my point? It's right here. Okay, we're going to press our seams towards the gray this time. Oh, I didn't do that right, did I? Oh yeah, I did. Towards the gray. And now we're going to sew this piece on, and this seam will actually get pressed towards the purple rectangle. So when I'm sewing my flying geese and I'm doing my 1/4 inch seam, I am aiming just, not right on the intersection, just before the intersection. I find that if I sew right on the intersection, my tip kind of gets rolled under. So if I give it just the teeniest bit of breathing room, then the tip of the flying geese turns out better. There, that looks great. All right, now I think we're just back to basics now. So you're going to sew on one side at a time. You'll have both of those sewn together. Give it a good press and then sew and align these on. That's as easy as it gets. Well, thank you very much. We'll see you at the next one.